now that I think back, what I actually was doing, I was teaching myself transposition without knowing that it was transposition. I just knew that the trumpet was written in this musical vocabulary that was different from the euphonium playing. And so from the get-go, my brain was able to understand that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 41. Joining me is composer Tyler S. Grant. Before we begin, I would like to thank all of you for listening and for your support. I'd like to ask if you can help me in a couple of ways. First, if you have suggestions for improvement or ideas for guests or questions, please leave me a message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Second, help spread the word of the show. Tell your friends and colleagues to give it a listen. Now, onto the episode. Hi, Tyler.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so you're my first guest after Midwest. I've taken a week off the first time of the podcast. And so now we're returning January 1st.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah,
Glad to be here.
So for those who may not know your name, and I don't think there are too many, can you tell everyone what you do?
Well, my name is Tyler Grant. I'm a composer and a music education major at the University of Alabama. I'm 22 years old. I've been composing actively with a publisher and having performances of my music regularly since about 2010. My first piece was published in 2009, and have been publishing with FJH Music Company for the past 9 or so years, and plan to graduate in 2019 with my bachelor's degree in music education, and hopefully become a band director soon after that.
Tyler, it's really great to have you on the show. You're very young, and I don't want to make too much of an issue out of that, but it's extraordinary to most of us that you had your first published work at age 14.
Yeah.
And so what was that like? Did you have parents who are musical? How did that come about?
Well, I grew up in a city where we were fortunate to start band actually in fourth grade. So I had a very early exposure to music compared to most. I think the standard grade to start band now is sixth grade. And so my parents both participated in band in middle school and high school. My mom was in the color guard at West Virginia University, where they both met, but they did not major in music, did not have aspirations to go that route. My brother had a 2-week career as a trombonist, and very short trombone career, and he later went on to do other things. So I did not come from a very musical family, and when I started band in fourth grade, I originally did not know if I was going to like it or not, and my music teacher sort of forced me into it a little bit against my will. And I'm very glad that she did that, of course, because when you're in fourth grade, you don't really know what you're going to end up doing in your life. And the fact that she put me in her band as a euphonium player that early on was really a turning point for me. That's really when I knew I was going to do something with music. I did not know that at the time, whether that would be a band director or conductor or anything. And very soon into my beginning band process, I began to sort of doodle music on the back of my sheet music that we were playing. I did not know at the time that it was composition or arranging. I would take football fight songs and write them on the back of these sheets, or just would come up with little melodies and would write melodies for my euphonium classmates or other friends in the ensemble. And that, or they would play something and I would try to write it down. And these are all things that sort of, as we know from college music courses, those are the things that develop your ears and your music skills. And so I was just doing that for fun. I didn't realize that it was melodic dictation or training my ear. And so had a great line of music teachers who saw that early on and knew that there was something different about what I was doing, and they would encourage me to try and compose, also to try and conduct. I had a very early interest in conducting, and would even go up to the podium after band class and steal scores off of the stands. I would always return them later, but what I did not know at the time was that score study, and that's how I really learned how the instruments in an ensemble function together, and how the colors and timbres would change from section to section, and how music was paced. So those were the early things that led to me having the tools to be able to start composing early on. And so from this public school program, I was able to write a few pieces here and there just for fun, with no intention of being published. And it wasn't until my seventh grade year that I submitted some works to some publishers and got some lovely rejection letters, as many people sometimes get, and established a relationship very early on with Brian Baumagis at FJH. And he took a chance on that first published piece and published it. And ever since then, we've just had a wonderful relationship. And Brian has been a huge mentor to me. We would all the pieces that I would send him, it was like they were composition lessons, because we would take time to revise the works and to find what did work and what didn't work, and to really just hone in on the skills that I was not yet exposed to. That was, for instance, counterpoint and orchestration, a bunch of things that I did not know at the time that he, of course, has years of experience with.
Well, that's terrific. So, I want to go back to when you were first writing things on the back of music. Did you have a music teacher who was pushing you to that, or was that something that you just did on your own?
I started doing it on my own, but when my music teacher discovered I was doing it, she very much encouraged me to keep doing it and to try to come up with my own original melodies and to try to get them played by my classmates, which was a huge step forward to that.
Yeah, that's really great. You mentioned that you're at the University of Alabama as a music ed major. You're having quite a career so far as a composer, but you do want to be a band director. You do want to get that degree and have some time in the classroom.
Yes, that's right. A few years after starting band, before I knew that I would be a composer, and that all this would sort of transpire with my composition career, I did decide that I do want to be a band director, and knew that I would major in music education from a very young age. And so I did at one point consider double majoring in composition and education, but as we know, the music education degree is very time consuming. And so I knew that with everything on my plate that I would probably just stick with the music education degree alone. And in many ways, it's been a great compositional teaching tool, having to learn all the instruments and learn their transpositions and learning how to work with an ensemble, a group of young students. And it's just been it's been a very educational experience to major in that.
Yeah, I imagine it must be interesting because you have actually worked with honor bands. You've conducted honor bands and at many levels. And so the obvious question is, what's that like working with students who are close to you in age? How do they react to you?
Well, when I was younger and started doing it, it was always a little bit intimidating at first, because the people you were in front of are the same age as me at the time. And so at first it was a little bit daunting, a little overwhelming. And some of the best advice that I ever got early on was that, I started doing all these clinics with groups and learned and started to conduct a lot. And somebody made the suggestion to me that I should probably learn how to conduct if I was going to do all that. And they're absolutely right. I sort of got thrusted into this before I knew much about what it meant to be a conductor. And so now that I've taken active steps to be more educated and trained as a conductor and a teacher, it's incredibly rewarding to do that, because I've had the wonderful opportunity, because of the composition experience, to interact with a lot of great conductors and to do conducting workshops and other things that have really helped hone those teaching skills. And so it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. Now that there's a little bit more age than there used to be. At one point, I was a high schooler working with middle school students. That was a really close age gap. Now that I'm into my 20s, and I've discovered that the shows that they watch as kids are not the same shows that I watched on on television on Saturdays. They still see me a little bit like an old guy, which is a humbling experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you're 22 now?
Yes.
Yeah. My first teaching job, I think I was 26. So not that far off.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So who's your principal teacher, mentor, advisor at the University of Alabama right now?
Right now, that is Randall Coleman. He's I study euphonium privately with Dr. Jeremy Crawford, who is a former student of DeMondre Thurman's, who is a very well-known euphonium player and teacher who used to be at the University of Alabama. And so I've spent a lot of time working with him on my euphonium playing, and recently took an independent study course with Randall Coleman in conducting. And so a lot of my time is spent with him, where we've talked about the history of the wind band, a lot of things that I would not get unless I was getting my graduate degree in wind conducting. A lot of things that just are not taught in the undergraduate track that are very foundational to our understanding as band composers. And so we spent a lot of time talking about the history of the wind band. We spend some time talking about gesture and the actual physical doing of conducting. But we just spend a lot of time about rehearsals and all the things that are really go into making a well-rounded musician. In addition to being a composer and a conductor, just things that make the whole musician. And so he's been a terrific mentor. We've since not taken courses together, or I don't do an independent study with him per se, but he still is somebody that I frequently email and talk to all the time with questions about programming for honor bands, certain what if scenarios. He's always somebody that's offering a lot of advice. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
All right. So I know that concert band music is the primary focus of your compositional career. So let's talk about publication. So you mentioned that you had your first piece with Brian Balmages at FJH at age 14. And so how many pieces do you have now, and what companies do you have them through?
I have about 20 published works, and those range from about grade 1 to roughly grade 5. And a majority of those are through FJH. Those are the works that are for young band, so between grades 1 and about 2.5. And then I have my grade 3 through 5 works self-published through my own website, tylersgrant.com, through the publishing company named TSG Music Works.
Interesting. So what was the decision to self-publish the higher grade works?
Well, for the younger works, the grade 1 through 2.5, there's something to be said for having the credibility of a publisher to help support your music. Band directors are often sorting through hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces for young band. And if they like the quality of music that comes from a particular publisher, especially in the young band category, then that's something that works in your favor. And especially for the works that require more technical attention because of the limitations with players, such as the clarinets and the brake and the ranges on the horns and everything. It really, having that extra set of eyes to look at the music and to make sure that it's accessible is pretty huge for the success of a young band piece. For my upper level pieces, I decided to self-publish those just for some of the standard pros and cons of self-publishing, which are that the industry standard is 10% through a traditional publisher, and for the upper level works, I decided that it would be worth the effort to try and self-publish it just to get a little bit more than 10%. Additionally, it's something that I've noticed is that a lot of high schools and college wind ensembles are they're buying music that's coming from self-published composers, and there's a huge push with the self-publishing movement right now, and something to be said for a composer who just brands themselves and puts the entire the weight of the quality on their own shoulders, and so it's just, in many ways, it's easier to get exposure that way because you're only promoting yourself. You're not promoting a whole roster of composers like on a traditional publishing platform. Now, likewise, since all the quality of the music falls on your shoulders, if the music is bad, then it's entirely your fault. You have nowhere else to pass the blame. And so that was sort of the decisions that I weighed with choosing to self-publish some works and publish others. Brian Balmages and I have a wonderful relationship. He's a very dear friend and still a very huge mentor and champion of my work. And I still have plans to publish a few pieces with them next year in the young band category. So it's not like there was ever a moment that we had a bad working relationship or anything. It's just a difference for those two categories of pieces. I felt that they had very different ways to be marketed, and so that's what went into my decision for choosing to self-publish and publish these pieces.
That's very wise. How did you come to that decision?
When I first started becoming active as a composer, was at a time when there were several composers that I can think of that were starting to go the self-publishing route. I know Michael Markowski is a composer who one of the first people that I befriended when I first started showing up to Midwest, and he had just decided to start self-publishing some of his work. And of course, like many people, got to know composers such as John Mackey and Steve Bryant, who are very pro self-publishing. And when you listen to their argument for self-publishing, there's a lot of stuff that just makes absolute sense. For instance, the copyright control and the not being handcuffed to a 10% royalty. And so there was a lot of pros there for that. And so that was something that when I started to think about it further and started to think about the longevity of my catalog, that was something that was very important to me, to have a little bit more of that authority for pieces that I really had more of a close connection to. And so that was something that helped me arrive at that decision. And but at the same time, I realized that if I were to start self-publishing everything, I would really need to. I don't think I could be in school, because the demands of self-publishing are incredibly intense. With the order fulfillment, with if I need to fill out vendor paperwork to sell music to a certain school, I sell through music distributors and music dealers such as Pepper and Stanton's Sheet Music. And so there are so many plates spinning right now just with the small catalog of pieces that I have self-published, that if I was taking on pieces at the middle school level, and those usually sell several hundred copies at a time, it just would be too much to overtake at one time. So, for where I'm at right now, still finishing my degree and still having about a year and a half to go, I knew that it was possible to self-publish some, but not self-publish everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like what you're doing. So I know we mentioned earlier that you work with schools, and so what are some notable clinics and honor bands you've worked with recently?
I recently conducted an all-county band in North Carolina. They commissioned a brand new work entitled "In Dreams Awake," and so I had a chance to conduct that piece, as well as several other wonderful composers' work. I have another all-county band in Philadelphia that's coming up in the next couple of months. And recently had the chance to work with the Harrison High School Band in Georgia for their winter band camp, for their symphonic band camp. If any directors that are listening are familiar with BOA or any of those marching band circuits, they'll probably recognize the name Harrison High School. So it really has ranged from elementary bands all the way through high school groups, as well as I did my first college residency a few months ago at Kennesaw State with David Keeler and Deb Trafficante, and so it was a wonderful experience there, and got to lecture to music education majors and composition majors, and so it's just even in the past couple of months, it's really spanned the whole gamut. It's as young as fifth graders all the way through the collegiate level.
And so, what was your first commission? Do you remember?
My first large scale commission was from a band program in Maryland. They had, I think it was the 10th anniversary of this honors wind ensemble. They commissioned a grade 2 piece called Winds of Celebration. What's funny is a lot of older pieces, and you probably would agree to this, they're like yearbook photos. You look back on them, and sometimes you completely question the decisions that you made in a piece of music, and that's the case with that piece. It sounds nothing like the music that I write now. And so that was the first piece that I had commissioned. And that director, John Sindler, was very patient and very gracious to do that, to agree to do a commission that early on in my career. And it's sort of interesting to come full circle. I'm actually starting a piece right now for a new group that he's conducting. He just moved to a different job. And so I'm 10 years later, getting to do another piece for him, which will be very exciting.
What does it look like now when someone commissions you? What's that process like for maybe someone who's a director out there who's never commissioned a composer, and they like your music and they want to get a hold of Tyler and say, hey, write a piece for us?
For now, let me try that again. Right now, the process, it takes a couple of years at this point. I'm very fortunate to be in the position now where it usually takes anywhere between 1 and 3 years from the time that a director contacts me to the time that the piece is actually on the podium and receiving its premiere. And so the first thing, of course, is just that initial contact. It's a lot of people wonder if you have to have all your ducks in a row from the beginning before you even contact the composer. And that's not necessarily true, for me at least. If a director is curious about that process, they're welcome to contact me and get a quote for how much the commission might cost, because that does vary from a middle school commission to a high school or collegiate commission. Those prices are very different, and so that initial contact and finding out exactly what the director has in mind, that's something that helps get that process started. And then from there, once I throw out a number that is relative to my set fees that I have, the at that point the director may say, well, we may need some more time to raise some more funds, or if they have a number that's a little bit less than what I had originally given them, then we are able to negotiate that and find a fee that is appropriate for me to receive the income that I need, but also for the program to not be financially struggling to make the commission payments. So I always I never let money be too much of a separator between the ability to do the commission. Nowadays, I'm actually having some programs that are putting together consortiums. So programs that cannot afford a multi-$1,000 commission, they'll organize to have several programs all contribute a few $100s and to meet the commission fee. And so that's sort of where that branches off into its own type of thing. But if we agree on a fee and we are able to figure out a work, and it also has to be a work that I want to write, that's a pretty important step, because if I have written 3 fanfares that year and they want me to write a 4th fanfare, that might be, first of all, I probably would never write 3 fanfares in a row. But if I have to make sure that my catalog is balanced, I can't have an entire catalog of slow music or an entire catalog of grade ones. So if the stars sort of align for us to work together, then I have a contract that I will send them, and they will send that back to me with a deposit, and then I send them chunks of music as the process goes on, and then the final payment is due upon the completion of the piece. And even if a director is wanting to work with me or even another composer, I always encourage them to think about a couple of things. Number one, being a composer you really believe in. You don't have to commission a big name composer to have a positive commissioning experience. There are composers that are just starting out who they might actually also be in a budget that you might not be able to afford with a different composer. So there's several ways to go about doing a commission process, and it doesn't have to be that one composer. I would suggest having multiple lists of composers that you'd be interested in working with, and talking to other directors who have done the commission process and find who they've worked with and what kind of experience they've had.
Yeah, and I would especially encourage the consortium idea. Often, if you want to commission a composer, if you go to the composer, they can put together the consortium from there.
Absolutely.
I know we just saw on social media, Randall Standridge just put together a big consortium, and he did it just on Facebook in a few days. Within
the past 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
John Mackey has done the same thing with several of his young band works with, I believe, Foundry, actually all 3 of them, Foundry, Sheltering Sky, and This Cruel Moon. I think all were consortium based through Facebook. And I don't know what the amount that each school had to contribute, but it was very low relative to commissioning an entire piece from somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a consortium for string orchestra, and 5 string orchestras each paid $500. And as a composer, I prefer it. I'd rather have more students play than less.
Absolutely, and it's nice to establish that relationship with a large amount of band directors at one time.
Yeah.
The consortium that I just did recently was for a grade 4 work called Solace in the Equinox, and that one I was able to connect with directors that I otherwise would not have connected with, just because of the word of mouth of band directors in North Carolina primarily, who just voiced their interest in having a partnership in this endeavor. And so it was a very, very rewarding experience just to have more people that I can now call friends and colleagues. So it's really a positive experience for everybody.
So I'm thinking about your compositional process, and I know you talked a little bit about starting with a grade level in mind, but I'm thinking about the band director who might be looking at your piece for the first time and doing their score study. And I want to ask you, what's your process when you first start to write a piece, and can you put it in there from the conducting point of view, maybe?
I know that the beginning of every piece, and this may not be incredibly relevant to the director, but it's every piece starts with a great amount of intimidation.
Yeah.
It's absolutely terrifying, and you've asked me this question at a great time because I just have been starting a piece over the past couple of days, and it's a very unsettling feeling to have a blank piece of paper in front of you. It's not a feeling that I like. So from the conductor standpoint, most of my music while I do map everything out from the beginning, so I do understand the architecture of the piece. I know that this part will be maybe fast or loud, or this section will be soft, or, I understand the entire work before I start out writing music. But most of the music is still just written from bar one all the way to the end. It's not written. I don't write the middle section and then go back and write the introduction. For me, I just write as I go, and I have an understanding of what my architecture is before the music sort of gets fleshed out. So, for a director that, when you think of the ideas as they're being introduced or developed upon, if that it's very much in line with just the performance of the piece itself.
Wow, that's interesting. So I'm sure you realize that from a compositional perspective, that's actually an unusual way to go about it.
Yes.
Yeah, most composers sort of go in with a vague notion.
There's still a little bit of a vague notion. I know for this piece that I'm starting now, I always try to have a couple of melodic ideas to just sort of get me started. That's just my foot in the door.
Yeah, sure.
But once I understand those, then before I can really figure out what is supposed to happen with those, I have to understand where those melodies and ideas are going to go.
I see.
And so that's where it's while it's still very vague, at some point I do have to make sure that I have structure, just to be able to spend less time beating my head against a brick wall and understanding where the notes are supposed to go. It helps me think a little bit more clearly about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you map things out? Do you draw pictures? Do you write it in prose?
Sometimes it's text documents. I'll write out introduction, and then this theme introduced, and I'll map things out that way. Sometimes I'll have just a large sheet of paper with nothing on it, and I'll draw like an architecture that is really only, if you looked at it, nobody probably would understand exactly what it means, but to me, it makes total sense. And so it's sort of just, it depends on the piece. It really changes from piece to piece. And then sometimes I've been able to improvise something at a keyboard, and it's something that I struggle to get it into notation form too quickly. So I'll pull up GarageBand or something just to record the chord progression that I was thinking of, or the melody. And so it's sort of, I just have multiple ways of starting that I have at my fingertips. And so whatever is required for that project, then that's what I usually will start with.
That's really interesting, Tyler. It's always good to hear other people's or composers' processes, because everyone's slightly different and everyone
Absolutely
has a personal touch to it because it's a very personal experience.
Indeed, yes.
So what advice would you give to other young composers?
It's interesting because in many ways people still identify me as a young composer, which is fine. I know some people think of it as a curse. I don't think of it as a curse at all. To other young composers like myself, who maybe they're starting out into interest in publishing, or interest into just trying to get their name out there a little bit more. On the one hand, it's, I encourage everybody's endeavors to really to try and find a publisher, or to find somebody that can help you get your name out there. But at the same time, I highly recommend having a mentor and really not being so obsessed on getting music published from the get-go, and just focusing on writing good music. And which sounds incredibly hypocritical of me, because I've had my first piece published when I was 14. I signed the contract when I was 13. And so it's, and now looking back on it, while I am happy with where my career is and everything, I do know that there are some pieces that I published that were probably a little bit, premature for what I could have made those pieces to be. And so it's something that I always want to stress to young composers. They don't have to have a piece published by, their 20s, or, by the time they're 25, or there's no age restriction on being a composer. Jim Stevenson, who is a very dear friend, he started composing, I think, late into his 20s, and he had a career as a trumpet player before that. So don't feel that there's that your opportunity is running out. just focus on writing good music and being versatile. That's the other thing, being a versatile composer, and not just listening to only band music, or if you're a choir composer, only listening to choir music. It's important to really just listen to a lot of good music and then try to manifest itself into a piece that happens to be for band or choir or orchestra.
Yeah, Tyler, that's really good advice. As someone who is in their middle age, I can tell you my first professional orchestra performance wasn't until I was age 29, and my first commercial publication wasn't until I was in my 40s. So, it's we all have different paths.
Absolutely.
And so long as you're happy with your career, I think that's what's most important. So let's talk about a topic that comes up, and we're going to go sort of into some general questions. And so what do you think about competition? I know that's one of the big topics that comes up on the show.
My views on competition, it's interesting. I actually graduated high school from a BOA competing marching band. So I've been around competition and have am familiar with the competing for All-State and competing for district band, and which on a side note, while I have auditioned for district and All-State honor band, I never was selected for All-State or district honor band. So to any band student that might be listening, just practice your instrument, be the best musician you can. But if you don't achieve that success, then that's not the end of the world. But there are positive aspects to be gained from the competitive nature of this activity, whether that be marching band or concert band. But my fear is that that becomes the only driving force for a lot of students. I know that I've seen some programs where students are entirely competition driven, and as a result, the artistry sort of suffers, and the decisions that they're making on the marching field or on the concert stage, they're not decisions in the best artistic integrity of the performance, but rather to please a judge or to please an adjudicator. And on the one hand, yes, it's great to have feedback from experts in the field, but on the other hand, if all you're doing is performing to this rubric that a particular set of judges have instilled as their values, it seems to take out the artistry from it. And so I'm not dissing all competition. That's not what I'm saying. But there's something to be said for making sure that our students are making art for the reason of just making art. Our society right now is already competitive. We're not in any short of competition in every aspect of life right now. And so, and especially in recent times, I just noticed that art is something that is very dear and sacred for a lot of us. And so, if we're making music, we need to just be making good music because the world needs beautiful music, not because we're trying to please a judge, and we're not trying to please these other people who are higher on a totem pole than us. We need just to make good music. And so if people are doing that and doing it in a competitive circuit, I'm totally fine with that. But we need to make sure that we're making art for the real reason to make art.
Yeah, I think that's a clear answer about what you draw the line, where you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy. And I think that's a good answer. All right, Tyler. So in your young career, you've surely had some missteps. And so do you have any advice for other composers, maybe perhaps to avoid some of those? Maybe especially for someone who's very young, like you were when you first started.
Some of the things that first come to mind would be, because I started so young and I was establishing long-term professional relationships at such a young age, I probably should have had a better understanding about how to really nurture those relationships. And some of those are very basic things, like making sure that you respond to email on time, or how to write a professional email. And those are things that I did pick up later on into my career, but I probably could have definitely I could have done better with that as young when I was younger. So those are a couple of things. And also, I would think that I would also suggest just not over dramatizing the process. What I mean by that is, especially as a young composer, it's very easy after having your first couple of successes to think that the next piece that you write could be a career ender if it's not the best piece you've ever written. And I remember, especially after having my first piece published, I froze up for a while. There's several months actually that I was so intimidated by that first success that I just didn't think that anything I could write after that would be worthy enough of this this idea in my head that, now you're a published composer. And so everything after that has to be of the utmost quality. And so I would recommend to young composers to allow yourself to make, to write pieces that are not your best, which is, sometimes we're our own worst enemy as composers. We are very, we self-critique all the time. And so I just would encourage them to make sure that they know that it's okay to write a piece that's not always your best, and to, go back and revise it later and find out why it didn't do as well as you would have hoped, and learn from that and use that in your future pieces. So those are things that I would highly recommend. Just making educated risks, and accepting that your pieces may not always be the best, and it's okay to learn from those.
Yeah, Tyler, I would just want to say for the record that, a couple times I've asked you for other young composers, but I want to tell you that you have really wise answers, and that your answers are useful to all composers. And I'm sorry if I've been condescending. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Well, sometimes that just happens, and I don't really mean for it to happen, but your answers are terrific, because that's an answer that I could use myself. Because there are times when I get in my own head, and I remember when I first was published, and I think, oh my goodness, now what do I do next?
Yes. And it's a daily thing. I say this, not as if it's something that was 5 years ago and it's all behind me now. It's something that we as composers, we all deal with, and I was dealing with it today. I've spent several hours, here working, and it's still, there's that little person on my shoulder that says that, you're not going to write a good piece like you did last time, and it's just learning to cope with that, and to really just find the courage to push through it.
Yeah, that imposter syndrome is a brutal thing.
Absolutely.
That's this belief that you're not good enough. And I think it's pretty common for most people, particularly creative people.
Yes.
What's your favorite work for wind ensemble or band?
I had this question ahead of time, and it's still a very daunting question. And so, to the listeners out there, this is not a very easy answer. So I have a couple of prepared answers, but trying to narrow it down to one work is just impossible. Of course, several just staple wind band pieces that we all know and admire, such, the whole suites, and O Magnum Mysterium is another is a favorite of mine, the transcription. And but aside from those, it's still just music that is very very prominent in the repertoire, and is still very much, I guess, many would consider staples, is a lot of music by Frank Kelly. And particularly some of his more lyrical pieces, such as Rest and Sanctuary. Those are just works that I love their structure and their pacing, and the way that he's used time and color in a very effective way. So those are a couple of my favorite pieces at the moment. That always changes. Right now, I'm listening to a lot of music by a composer that's not actually a wind band composer, but has recently started writing music for wind band. His name's Adam Schoenberg, and recently had his second symphony premiered by Jerry Junkin in the UT Wind Ensemble at CBDNA. So those are several answers to try to avoid the question. Those are just a few works that I've been listening to now, or composers that I've been listening to a lot of over the past couple of years.
Sure. Yeah. So is there anything that coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
There's a new piece that I recently finished. And I'm actually doing a consortium structure for the funding of the piece. And because it's so unique, I'm keeping the consortium open to directors for the next several months. If anybody would still like to contribute and have your name in the published score. But it's a piece for solo trombone and young band. And this is an idea that trombonist John Whitaker, who's on faculty at Alabama, had the idea for. And it was a piece for professional level trombone, or even perhaps an undergraduate or graduate student at a local university, with a band accompaniment that's playable by advanced middle school or average high school wind ensembles. And so the piece is called Paceline, which has to do with road biking. John Whitaker is a very avid road biker. And so it's about a 4-minute piece, and the band parts are about a grade 3. So if band directors have a local trombonist that they would like to work with, then they are welcome to join the consortium. You can join the consortium for as low as $250. And then this summer, the piece will be available as a regular published work for less than that. So you can either perform it this year if you'd like to be in the part of the consortium, or even next year as well. So it's a very unique piece. So it's requires a little bit of extra planning, but we're both very excited about the way the piece turned out, and have a brand new recording by the UA Wind Ensemble that will be on John's new CD here in the next couple of months.
Oh, cool. So, you know what I forgot to ask you when I asked you for your favorite piece?
Yes.
Can you tell me, or can you give me a piece of yours if you had to pick one that you'd like people to listen to? If no one knew Tyler S. Grant, what piece would you send them to? And that's a hard question for a composer.
It is. Probably it would, if you asked me this question 2 years from now, it probably would be a different answer, of course, but it always changes as you know. But right now, a piece that I finished about 6 months ago, or I finished it about a year ago and revised it 6 months ago. It's a brand new piece called Solace in the Equinox. It's a piece that is about 7 minutes long, and if you go and read the program notes, I won't share it here, but if you read the program notes, it's very near and dear to me personally, and has a personal significance to it. And that piece just was a piece that has a lot of it stretched my harmonic vocabulary a little bit more than other pieces I've written, and so I'm incredibly excited about that piece, and it's now published and out there and available to be purchased.
All right, Tyler, how can people get in touch with you?
If for band directors, they're welcome to reach out to me on Facebook. If their profile says that they're a band director, I'll happily accept their friend request. I don't accept friend requests from students. But Instagram and Twitter, all those social media platforms, all of them, the name is just Tyler S. Grant. And on Facebook as well, it's just Tyler S. Grant. And then they're also welcome to find me on my website, which is tylersgrant.com. And that has links to all my pieces published by FJH, as well as my self-published music, and information about commissions and all other stuff that I'm up to.
And you're very quick responding to your contact form.
Yes, I try to be.
So anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to say?
Not that I can think of. I'm incredibly happy to be a part of this podcast, and wish you all the best in your future episodes. I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, me too. Well, this is episode 41. I'm coming up on the end of my first year in March. And I just had my first Midwest as a podcaster, and that was really successful for me.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. And I've got a lot of exciting guests who have agreed to be on, and I'm looking forward to a productive spring and summer here.
Absolutely.
Well, Tyler, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.